Oh my God, my sinuses are just crazy. Like, I couldn't even sleep last night. Isn't that the worst? When you're just trying to sit there and breathe normally, but your sinuses are all congested or your nose is all filled up with mucus and you just can't breathe normally. I hear all the time from people who cannot breathe through their nose, whether it's sinus infections or allergies or their nose is just always blocked. Whatever the reason is, a lot of people just cannot breathe through their nose. Well, you might be wondering what's the big deal, because if our nose is blocked, we can just breathe through our mouth. Well, actually, breathing through your nose will make a big difference, and I'll show you why. So let's go over the anatomy of your nose real quick. Now, disclaimer, I suck at drawing, so I hope this will help. So first, let's draw the nose. So, got a nice big nose here. And again, I suck at drawing, but you get the picture. So that's your nostril right there. Actually, I'm just gonna round that out. It's a little too pointy of a nose for me. That's a little better, whatever. So first thing we have when we breathe in air through our nose is we have these hairs. So these hairs in our nose are those annoying things that we always like to pluck out, and those things we like to trim, and they don't look so pretty. But they have an important function. These hairs in our nose are really important for catching stuff. So they can catch like dust or other particles, and they can kind of filter some of the air that we're breathing in. Now, another thing we have in our nose is mucus. And you should probably know what mucus is, because if you're always congested, then you always have a lot of mucus, right? So mucus is basically all throughout our nose. Again, I suck at drawing, so bear with me. But the good thing about mucus is mucus has these enzymes in it. And these enzymes can kill a lot of the viruses and bacteria that we breathe in. So your nose actually filters out 98 to 99% of viruses and bacteria. You don't get that through your mouth. So also in our nose, we have what's called our turbinates. Now we have 3 turbinates. So we have one on the bottom, and it looks kind of like this, and it's called our inferior turbinate because it's on the bottom. We have one in the middle, and the middle one is called the middle turbinate. And we have one on the top called the superior turbinate because it's on the top. So those are our turbinates. And sorry for my terrible handwriting. So what do these turbinates do? Well, these turbinates actually have a really important function. They actually warm and they humidify the air that comes in. So let's say it's like a cold winter day and we're breathing through our nose. And as the air comes in and reaches these turbinates, they'll start to warm and humidify the air and make it more closer to our body temperature. So why is that important? Why is it important to warm up the air and humidify it before it comes into our body? Well, let's say we're breathing through our mouth. So I have a mouth here, and that's the tongue. Again, sorry for my bad drawing skills. I'll just label it. So we have mouth, and we have nose up here. So as air is coming in through the mouth, it goes straight down into our lungs. As opposed to the nose, which it has to go through all this stuff and some other stuff I'm going to talk about, and then eventually it'll make its way down to the lungs. So the end destination is the same regardless. So let's say you're breathing through your mouth and you're getting this cold air into your lungs. Well, the issue with that cold air is, 1, it's very dry, and 2, it's cold. So when that cold air enters your lungs, 1, it can actually dehydrate those cells. And the way it does that is, 1, because it's not as humidified as the air that comes through the turbinates. Because again, these turbinates will humidify the air and it'll also warm the air. So what happens is, as this air enters your lungs, it can cause a few things. It can cause a lot of inflammation buildup, it can cause your allergies to act up, and it can kind of cause like a spasm. So if you ever have like a really tight chest, or you have like an allergy attack, or you have like a coughing attack when it's a cold day outside and you're breathing through your mouth, this is why. Now compare that when the air comes through your nose. Again, you're filtering out some of that air, and you're filtering out some of those viruses and bacteria, and also that air is going through these turbinates, which are warming and humidifying the air. And when it gets to your lungs, it's a lot less likely to cause that inflammation, and it's going to be a lot more gentle to our lungs. So the last thing I want to talk about when you breathe through your nose is your paranasal sinuses. So that's spelled your paranasal sinuses. So we actually have multiple of these paranasal sinuses. So our paranasal sinuses are basically these hollow spaces that are in the bones that surround our nose. And we have multiple locations for them. So if I were to draw someone's face, I don't think that's too bad, right? We have some paranasal sinuses up here, over here, around here. You kind of get the picture, right? And if I were to show you the side of the face, we have another one more in the back there. So the cool thing about our paranasal sinuses is as the air comes in through our nose and goes in through all these sinuses, it actually releases nitric oxide. So nitric oxide is really cool, and it actually has a lot of cool benefits that it gives our body. So one is that it's an antibacterial. So that means it can fight off all those bacteria and fight off a lot of infections. So that means it'll keep this whole upper nasal cavity really clean. So that can prevent a lot of infections like in your tonsils or your adenoids. So if you know a lot of people that have to get their tonsils and adenoids removed, this is part of the reason why, if they're not getting enough nitric oxide and their tonsils and adenoids are always getting inflamed and infected. The other thing that nitric oxide does is it's a vasodilator. So that means that not only is it fighting off all the bacteria up here, it's also helping our whole body because since it's a vasodilator, it can lower our blood pressure and it can also improve our heart. And the reason is that it's opening up everything, right? It's a vasodilator, meaning it's opening up all our blood vessels. So you can see the problem if you're a mouth breather as opposed to a nose breather, right? Because if you breathe through your mouth, you don't get any of these benefits of breathing through your nose. You don't get any of this nitric oxide, you don't get any of the filtering, you don't get any of the temperature difference in the air, you don't get any of the humidifying. So you're missing out on a lot of these benefits that you get from breathing through your nose. But if you're a mouth breather, you're not just missing out on all these benefits of breathing through your nose. You're also kind of harming yourself in a way. Because first of all, if you're not getting this nitric oxide, you're not getting this antibacterial, and now everything up here is more prone to getting infections. So again, that's why your tonsils and adenoids are at a much higher risk of getting those infections and potentially having to get removed because it's blocking that airway. You can imagine someone who has to breathe through their mouth who now has these large tonsils and these large adenoids, and you can just wonder, like, how are they even breathing if their tonsils are so big and their adenoids are so big and it's just blocking the air from getting into their lungs. But also, if you're a mouth breather, it's making your nose more stuffy in the first place. And one of the reasons is this nitric oxide, right? You're not getting this antibacterial, so you're more prone to getting these infections in your sinus. But also, we have these breathing receptors in our brain. So we have two different breathing receptors in our brain. One is to monitor whether or not we're breathing through our nose versus our mouth, but the other one measures the volume of air that goes into our lungs and the volume of air that comes out. Now I'll draw that out for you as well. So these are our breathing centers, our breathing centers. So again, these are located in our brain. So I'm going to attempt again to draw, and this is our brain, and that's my attempt at a brainstem. So let's call these receptors 1 and receptors 2. Receptor 1 does nose versus mouth. Right, so this is the one that basically says whether or not you're breathing through your nose or your mouth. Receptor 2 measures strictly the volume. So this measures the volume of air that goes into your lungs and the volume that goes out of your lungs. This one does not care about breathing through your nose or your mouth. So this receptor doesn't really pay attention to that. So you're probably wondering, like, where are you going with this? Like, can you just get to the point? Well, I'm getting to the point right now. So let's say we have nose breather on this side, right? So we have a nose again, and air's coming in through the nose. And on this side, we have a mouth. So this is gonna be a little bit more challenging, so maybe I'll just draw like someone smiling. All right, so that is the mouth breather, and we have air going in here versus air going in here. So when you are a nose breather, you're taking a lot slower breaths, right? Because this nose hole is a lot smaller than that mouth hole. So your air is coming in a lot slower, and it's also coming out a lot slower through the nose. And as opposed to a mouth breather, you're taking a lot more frequent breaths because the air's coming in really quickly, but it's also coming out really quickly. So if you remember from biology class, when you breathe in oxygen, and when you breathe out CO2. So in oxygen, out CO2. So what happens is when you're breathing in through your mouth and breathing out through your mouth, again, you're breathing out really quickly, and that means you're releasing this carbon dioxide or the CO2 really quickly. And this number 2 receptor that we talked about that's in the brain, that will see that you're releasing way more carbon dioxide than you're supposed to. Because since you're breathing in and breathing out really quickly, you're releasing way more air than that's normal. The problem is this receptor will assume that you're a nose breather. I know that I told you it doesn't determine whether or not you're a nose or a mouth breather, it just assumes that you're a nose breather. So what it does is it stimulates these cells in your nose to produce more mucus. And the goal of this receptor is to slow down how much air you're breathing out. And the reason is it's losing too much CO2. It wants to keep some of the CO2 in your body. And you may think that the CO2 we have is just a waste product, right? Like we breathe in oxygen and that's all that we need, and we breathe out carbon dioxide because we don't need it. Well, actually, that's a lie. We really need carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide is actually really important because, one, carbon dioxide actually helps us absorb oxygen. Because just because the oxygen comes into our body, it doesn't mean it can just go straight to our cells. We need carbon dioxide to help the oxygen go to our cells. And one way it does that is it regulates the pH in our body. So the pH is basically a way to determine how acidic an environment is. So if the carbon dioxide is regulating how acidic our blood and how acidic our body is, and if this balance of how acidic or how basic our body is thrown off, then we're not going to absorb our oxygen as well. So that's why carbon dioxide is really important, and that's why this number 2 receptor is going to try to slow down our breathing. But the problem is, again, it's assuming we're breathing through our nose, and it's going to cause all this mucus buildup to block the amount of air that can come out through our nose. But since we're a mouth breather, we're going to keep breathing in through our mouth and breathing out through our mouth, again, really quickly. And this number 2 receptor is going to see, again, that we're losing a whole lot more volume of air that we need to, and it's going to produce even more mucus. So it's like a never-ending battle, and you're going to keep getting a really stuffy nose if you're a mouth breather. Okay, so you might be wondering, like, that's great and all, but there's no way I can become a nose breather. Like, if I tried taping my mouth shut and I tried just becoming a nose breather, I would die. There's no way I can breathe through my nose. You know, there's a lot of reasons someone can be a mouth breather. So let's go over some of them. So one reason people become mouth breathers is if they break their nose, or in other words, a deviated septum. So if you ever heard of this, or if you have one of these, it sucks, and you know what it's like, that it's really hard to breathe through your nose. Other reasons people breathe through their nose is they have a lot of allergies, or their nose is just always congested, and we went over that a little bit. Or sometimes they have what's called a tongue tie. And a tongue tie is basically when your tongue is glued to the floor of your mouth. Now, obviously it's not actually glued, but we have an attachment from our tongue to the floor of our mouth. And usually we like to have a little bit of freedom with this attachment. Like usually we like to be able to move our tongue around, and this will help us eat, talk, and just do a lot of other functions that our tongue can do. But sometimes this attachment is way too long, and we can't do any of these functions from our tongue. And if you want to check if you have one, you can just look in the mirror. Like put your tongue to the roof of your mouth and try to really widen your smile. So I'll show it to you now. So you can see, even I don't know if you were able to see it in the camera, but there's a bit of a tongue tie there. But it only really becomes an issue when it starts lowering your quality of life. But the reason the tongue is important is when we breathe through our nose, our tongue is supposed to be resting against the roof of our mouth. And when our tongue is resting against the roof of our mouth, well, it's doing a couple things. Well, one is it's basically blocking us from breathing through our mouth. Have you tried breathing through your mouth when your tongue is against the roof of your mouth? It's impossible. You can try it. And the other thing this does is, as you're a kid and your jaw and your facial structure is still developing, if your tongue is resting against the roof of your mouth, it'll stimulate the roof of your mouth to kind of expand. And in doing so, it can widen your face, it can widen your jaw, and this can allow all your teeth to fall into the right place, and it can just make sure everything develops correctly. So this is really important. But sometimes people who have this tongue tie, where their tongue is glued to the floor of their mouth, they can't put their tongue to the roof of their mouth. So now their tongue can't even rest against the roof of their mouth, and their mouth is gonna stay open, and this is how they become a mouth breather. So I will say that for some of the stuff, there's a pretty simple fix, like always having allergies, always having nose congestion, or just always being sick. There is a way you can start breathing through your nose rather quickly. But if you have like a deviated septum where it's really hard for you to even breathe through your nose, that might require you to get a surgery to kind of correct that. And the same thing if you have a tongue tie where your tongue is glued to the floor of your mouth, you might need to get a small surgery. And this is a very common procedure, but basically all it is they clip that attachment from the floor of your mouth to your tongue. And this also comes with some tongue exercises, but after these exercises and after the surgery, you have a lot more freedom with your tongue. But for the most of you who are always congested, always have these sinus infections, always have these allergies, what is a really simple way you can start breathing through your nose again? Well, really it comes down to two things. One is using a nasal spray, but the second thing is you can actually try this exercise. So I'm gonna look a little dumb doing this, but I'm doing it for you to help you guys. So what you need to do is first you need to cover your mouth with your finger, and this will basically just prevent you from breathing through your mouth. And you need to take a quick breath in and out through your nose. And what you're gonna do after that is you're gonna kind of bob your head. And you're gonna look really silly doing this, so make sure you're alone and not like me who's doing it on camera. But this bobbing your head will just create more circulation in your nose area. And what you're doing is while you're bobbing your head, you're holding your nose and you're holding your mouth so that you're not breathing anymore. You're holding your breath. And what this does is it's building up the CO2 or the carbon dioxide in your body. And as it builds up more and more CO2, it's telling that number 2 receptor to stop producing so much mucus. And as that CO2 builds up more and more in your body, that mucus will slowly go down and down. And you can actually repeat this exercise up to 6 times. So I'm gonna demonstrate that for you now. And I'm not gonna do the whole thing, but you keep doing that bobbing your head motion until you can't hold your breath anymore. And once you can't hold your breath anymore, you take a deep breath through your nose. And you'll find that if you use a nasal spray and then you do this, that it'll start to open up a little bit. And if you do that up to 6 times, then you should be able to sleep while breathing through your nose. But after you do this, how do you make sure, like let's say you're going to sleep, that you're breathing through your nose? Like if it's during the day, that's pretty easy because you can kind of control by keeping your lips closed, keeping your tongue to the roof of your mouth, and breathing through your nose. But when you're sleeping, you can't really control that. Well, this is gonna sound a little barbaric, but the trick is to keep your mouth taped shut. So I'm not asking you to use like duct tape or anything super sticky. And if you're using like normal tape, you probably wanna just put it on a cloth a couple times just to weaken it a little bit and then put it over your mouth. So you can probably find something online that's for like really sensitive skin. Don't use anything too sticky here. But if you follow all these steps, then it should help a lot of you start breathing through your nose again and get all these benefits that we talked about. Now, let's say you try all these tricks at home, but you're still struggling. You still can't breathe through your nose and you're still having a really stuffy nose. Well, at this point, I'd probably ask you to go to your physician to see what else needs to be done for you. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you liked that video. And if you haven't already, please hit that thumbs up button and subscribe to my channel below. I'll see you in the next video.